The Columbia River Basin, one of the largest in North America, spans 7 of the United States and reaches far into Canada. This 219,000 square mile drainage area includes approximately 3,000 square miles of waterways, lakes, and storage reservoirs. Originating in Canada, the Columbia River twists over 1,200 miles and descends approximately 3,500 vertical feet on its way to the Pacific Ocean. In all, 25 dams span the Columbia River and its tributaries, enhancing navigation, fishing, wildlife, and recreation while providing water storage, flood control, irrigation, and hydroelectric power for the Northwest. This presentation will address the 7 hydroelectric projects located on the main stem of the Columbia in central Washington, but it will focus on the control system known as Mid-Columbia Hourly Coordination that continuously manages the flow of the river through these projects. This 7-dam system includes Grand Coulee, Chief Joseph, Wells, Rocky Reach, Rock Island, Wanapum, and Priest Rapids. Grand Coulee, a federal project operated by the Bureau of Reclamation, is by far the largest in the system. It is the uppermost project and provides priming for the system with over 5 million acre-feet of storage in Lake Roosevelt. Chief Joseph, located 51 river miles downstream from Grand Coulee, also a federal project, is operated by the Corps of Engineers. BPA markets the power generated from these 2 federal projects. Wells is owned and operated by Douglas County PUD. This project is located 30 miles from Chief Joseph. Participants of output from this project include Douglas County PUD, Puget Sound Power and Light, Portland General Electric, Pacific Power and Light, Washington Water Power, and Okanogan County PUD. Rocky Reach, located about 41 miles below Wells, is owned and operated by Chelan County PUD. Participants of this project are Chelan County PUD, Puget Power, Colocum Transmission, Portland General Electric, Pacific Power, Washington Water Power, and Douglas County PUD. Rock Island, also owned and operated by Chelan County PUD, is only 20 miles from Rocky Reach. Puget Power and Chelan County PUD share the output of this project. Wanapum is located approximately 37 miles from Rock Island and has the largest storage reservoir of the non-federal projects. Participants include Grant County PUD, Pacific Power, Portland General Electric, Puget Power, Washington Water Power, Cowlitz County PUD, Eugene Water and Electric Board, and the cities of Forest Grove, McMinnville, and Milton Freewater. Priest Rapids, the southernmost project in the system, is 18 miles from Wanapum. Participants include those who share in Wanapum, as well as Seattle City Light, Tacoma City Light, and Kittitas County PUD. The Priest Rapids project, which includes the Wanapum and Priest Rapids developments, is owned and operated by Grant County PUD. These 7 projects and over 15 participants have united together into the Mid-Columbia Hourly Coordination System. In order to fully appreciate how these 7 projects work together, it's necessary to have an understanding of 4 major characteristics that are common to all projects that affect power generation. This project profile will help explain these characteristics. They are storage, hydraulic head, hydraulic capacity, and generating capacity. Storage is the ability of a project to impound water. The dark area represents the unusable or dead storage required to maintain the minimum reservoir elevation. The light area is the active storage used to regulate river flow and power generation. The difference in elevation between the reservoir's surface and the tailwater is called hydraulic head. The maximum flow that can pass through the turbines is called the hydraulic capacity. Generating capacity for each project is the maximum power generation possible. This chart shows the diversity between the projects and highlights the complexity of maintaining a coordinated system. One of the prime objectives of hourly coordination is to keep the 6 reservoirs downstream from Grand Coulee full in order to maximize power output and to reduce radical fluctuations in forebay levels. This objective is partially achieved by priming, which occurs when Grand Coulee generates additional power to increase the inflow to the downstream projects. This priming maintains the downstream forebay elevations at higher levels. It provides for additional generation downstream while using only a small portion of Grand Coulee's active storage. As an example, water moved from Grand Coulee and distributed among the active storage areas of all 6 downstream projects would increase their hydraulic heads. A 50-foot head gain throughout the lower 6 projects could be achieved with only a half-foot head loss at Grand Coulee. This net increase in hydraulic head throughout the system at a flow rate of about 70,000 cubic feet per second would result in a power gain of about 250 megawatts. This is an extreme example, but it illustrates one of the purposes and benefits of effective and efficient management through hourly coordination. Since the implementation of hourly coordination, these 7 projects are now operating at a level that ensures the most efficient and optimum production of hydroelectric power. Hence, with hourly coordination in effect, it is now possible to produce more power with the same total flow. River fluctuations through these projects are controlled with 6 levels of logic. Logic levels that apply to the 6 downstream projects are overfill, overdraft, anticipatory spill protection, approaching overfill, approaching overdraft, and refill. Immediate spill protection applies to Chief Joseph only. The purpose of the refill logic is to keep a project full. This logic system activates the priming relationship between the projects. The approaching overdraft logic senses a lowering of the reservoir level and attempts to slow the draft rate as it approaches minimum operating elevation by reducing its discharge. The approaching overfill logic senses a rising of the reservoir level and attempts to slow the fill rate as it approaches maximum operating elevation by increasing its discharge. The anticipatory spill protection logic attempts to maintain a project's reservoir elevation below a specified ASP elevation by increasing the project discharge. The increased available storage is then held in anticipation of receiving inflow that would otherwise have caused the project to overfill and spill. The immediate spill protection logic attempts to maintain the Chief Joseph Reservoir elevation below a specified ISP elevation by reducing the Grand Coulee discharge. Overdraft and overfill logic levels are the highest priority controls. The overdraft logic is activated when the reservoir level would be less than the minimum operating level within 1 hour at the current draft rate. It attempts to maintain the reservoir level above a minimum by reducing the discharge. The overfill logic is activated when the reservoir level would be over the maximum operating level within the hour at the current fill rate. It attempts to maintain the reservoir level below maximum by increasing the discharge. The software containing all the logic for controlling the physical operation of the projects in the Mid-Columbia is called the operating strategy. Unless manually overridden, this strategy is in constant control of the 7 projects, monitoring all their operations and dispatching generation requests every 4 seconds. We have shown that the fluctuation of the river, and therefore the physical operation of the projects, are controllable. We will now show how efficient power production is achieved by distributing the Mid-Columbia generation requests among these 7 projects. This process works as follows. Grant PUD, Chelan PUD, Douglas PUD, and BPA each operate a system control center for their respective projects. These system control centers receive the uncoordinated generation request from the participants at each project. These requests are called uncoordinated because most participants will submit their requests without knowledge of the magnitude of requests being submitted simultaneously by other participants. Prior to hourly coordination, these uncoordinated requests went directly to the projects. This often resulted in overfilling and spilling at some projects and overdrafting at others. Now, a coordinated operation is achieved by making adjustments prior to dispatching these requests to the various projects. This adjustment process takes place every 4 seconds. It begins by totaling the uncoordinated generation requests for each project at the System Control Center. The total raw request for each project is then transmitted to Central. Central is the control center for the entire system of projects and is located at Ephrata, Washington, in Grant County PUD's control facility. Central adds these raw requests together to determine the total generation requested of the Mid-Columbia system. Central then determines the optimal generation needed from each project to meet this total requirement. This is called the adjusted or coordinated generation requirement. This adjustment process maximizes the use of water passing through each project while meeting the total generation requested of the Mid-Columbia system. For each project, the difference between the adjusted or coordinated requests determined by Central and the raw or uncoordinated requests submitted by the participants is called bias. This bias can be positive or negative. Central transmits 7 computed generation bias values, one for each project, to the 4 system control centers. Upon receipt of this transmission, the system control centers proceed to determine and dispatch coordinated generation requirements to their respective projects. An important point to remember is the sum of all project bias values throughout the system is always equal to 0. Central is simply redistributing the requests among the 7 projects and is not adding to or subtracting from the generation requests of the various participants. Let's review this process. Each of the participants submits an uncoordinated request to the System Control Center. The System Control Center totals the requests from all participants and transmits a raw request to Central. Central compiles these raw requests, determines optimal generation values, and transmits bias values back to the system control centers. The system control centers then send an adjusted generation requirement to each project. Finally, the loop is closed when each participant receives the amount of generation that it had requested for its system. Let's now look at the parameters which govern the operating strategy of hourly coordination. All rights and obligations that prevailed prior to the inception of hourly coordination are preserved by the Mid-Columbia Hourly Coordination Agreement. Rights and obligations apply in 2 categories, first to the projects, then to the participants. Project owners and operators have the right to operate and maintain the projects in a safe and efficient manner. They are obligated to operate the projects in compliance with existing law and controlling regulations. Legal non-power requirements, such as fish spill, have precedence over power requirements when applicable. Projects are obligated to serve the needs of the participants according to the agreements or arrangements that prevail. Each participant has the right to its share of each project's inflow, generating capacity, and the pondage. The participants have the right to request generation on a moment-by-moment basis. The participants are obligated to schedule and request generation in such a manner that the following obligations are fulfilled when applicable. Prevent overfill or overdraft of the reservoir. Request no more than its share of the project's capacity and use no more than its share of the project's pondage. To refill its share of the project's pondage in a timely manner and to avoid spill or wasted energy. In order to preserve these rights and obligations and to satisfy FERC requirements, accurate records are maintained of each project's operation. Just as operating strategy controls the physical operation of the 7 projects, an accounting software package is used to reconcile every detail of project operation and participant use. At the end of each hour, the system control centers report each project's generation, encroachment data, plant discharge, physical spill, fish spill, and reservoir elevation, as well as other pertinent data, to Central over the Columbia Basin Teletype Network, or CBTN. Central stores this project data and other information in a database which is used to produce logs for each project and all participants.
Okay, you got a +9.
Accounting records are maintained for both projects and participants. Project accounting records include coordinated generation, inflow, pondage, forebay elevations, spill, and other pertinent data resulting from the project operation. For each participant, accounting records include requested generation, spilled energy, inflow, allocated requests, pond accounts, and other pertinent data. A daily microfiche is produced by Central and transmitted to all participants wishing to maintain their own record of operation. 3 important factors must be reconciled in the accounting process: the percentage of inflow for each participant versus the total inflow at a given project, the physical pond versus the project pond account, and coordinated generation versus the allocated generation. Inflow is the water, measured in megawatts, that comes into the active storage area of any project. The inflow is determined each hour by adding the change in the forebay elevation, converted to average megawatts, the total power generated, and any spill that occurred that hour. Each participant in that project is entitled to its percentage of the total inflow according to its contractual share of the project. To prevent sharp increases and decreases in calculated inflow not attributed to normal river flow and fluctuation, the inflow is averaged over a rolling 12-hour period. Another important point to make clear is the distinction between physical pond and the project pond account. Physical pond refers to the water expressed in megawatt hours present in a project's active storage at any given time. The project pond account is the on-paper equivalent, expressed in megawatt hours, of the physical pond used for accounting purposes at the end of each hour. Just as each participant has an entitlement in the project's physical pond, each participant has an entitlement in the project's pond account. A project's pond account is equal to the total of the participants' pond accounts. The difference between coordinated generation and allocated generation is a complex concept. Coordinated generation refers to the actual generation at a project for a given hour. It is the sum of the total raw requests submitted by the participants and the bias value determined by Central. Allocated generation refers to the computed for accounting purposes generation at a project for a given hour. It is the sum of the generation values that Central determines as having been received from that project by each participant according to a pre-specified allocation process and established by the participants. The difference between coordinated generation and allocated generation is called coordination exchange. Let's look at an example of the accounting process. Say 5 participants submit raw generation requests at Rocky Reach totaling 600 megawatts. A bias of 200 megawatts comes back from Central, and Rocky Reach generates a total of 800 megawatts. At the end of the hour, Central allocates the generation on the basis of the participants' pre-specified allocation process. The total Rocky Reach allocated generation for the 5 participants is determined to be 575 megawatts. Notice that 2 additional participants who sent raw requests elsewhere have been allocated generation of 175 megawatts at Rocky Reach. This brings the total allocated generation up to 750 megawatts. The difference between the actual generation, 800 megawatts, and the allocated generation, 750 megawatts at Rocky Reach, is coordination exchange, or in this case, plus 50 megawatts. For the Mid-Columbia projects as a group, the total coordinated generation is always equal to the total allocated generation on an hourly basis. The difference in the 2 quantities at each project is equal to the coordination exchange. It then follows that the sum of all project coordination exchange values is 0 on an hourly basis. This is true because Central is neither adding to nor subtracting from each participant's total Mid-Columbia generation request. Central is simply redistributing each participant's total generation request among the projects and calling the redistributed quantities allocated generation values. For each project, the total coordination exchange incurred since the inception of hourly coordination is called accumulated coordination exchange. In a simplistic way, the difference between a project's pond account and its physical pond can be seen as accumulated coordination exchange. This can be understood by noting that inflow and allocated generation are the variables which cause changes in the project pond account, while inflow and coordinated generation are the variables which cause changes in the physical pond. At the inception of hourly coordination, project pond account and physical pond were equal at each project. Since that time, however, the two quantities have virtually never been equal because allocated generation and coordinated generation values are almost never equal. The accumulated difference between coordinated and allocated generation values at each project from the inception of hourly coordination is equal to accumulated coordination exchange. It therefore follows that the difference in project pond account and physical pond is also equal to accumulated coordination exchange. At each project, the physical pond and the project pond account will fill, draft, or remain essentially constant over a period of time depending upon the prevailing relationships between inflow, coordinated generation, and allocated generation. With inflow taken into account, a project can take on one of the following characteristics. If inflow and coordinated generation are the same, the physical pond will remain constant. Likewise, if the inflow and the allocated generation are the same, the pond account will also remain constant. If the inflow is greater than the coordinated generation, the physical pond will fill. If the inflow is greater than the allocated generation, the project pond account will also fill. And if the inflow is less than the coordinated generation, the physical pond will draft. Likewise, if the inflow is less than the allocated generation, the project pond account will again draft. The prevailing relationships between inflow, coordinated generation, and allocated generation can be such that the physical pond and the project pond account will trend in the same direction or in opposite directions at any given point in time. That is, one may be filling while the other is drafting, and vice versa. Because a project's physical pond has a limited capacity and a project's pond account doesn't, when a project's pond account is larger than the project's physical pond, we get into what is called deferred spill. The accounting process is a complicated process, but it has kept the Mid-Columbia system providing power efficiently to the Northwest for the past 15 years. A major benefit to the participants of hourly coordination is the continuous management of a vast resource which responds to a major portion of the demands of the electrical customers of the Pacific Northwest on a moment-by-moment basis throughout the day. This continuous management minimizes the unorganized operations which frequently occurred prior to the inception of hourly coordination. The arrangements described throughout this video represent an automated system that manages the smooth operation of over 8,000 megawatts of generation capacity. Dispatchers and schedulers are a valuable part of hourly coordination for all utilities. The dispatchers and schedulers represent the human portion of the man-machine interface that keeps hourly coordination in a continuous operation. They have the responsibility to ensure that utilities stay within the bounds of their rights and obligations. It is they who ensure that the resources of the Mid-Columbia operate in harmony with the resources of the entire Pacific Northwest.